In this presentation, we'll talk about organizing and structuring recreation parks, tourism, and leisure services. In general, there are two types of organizations. There are organizations that enhance innovation, creativity, and the flow of information, and there are organizations that promote close control and direction. Let's talk about the structure of an organization, how it reflects and supports the culture. So, structuring of leisure organization services is what we'll talk about. We'll talk about interrelations that exist among environmental factors, characteristics of formal organizations, types of organizations providing leisure services, and we'll wrap it up with factors involved in structuring the different organizations. Let's talk about organizational culture first. The culture of recreation parks and leisure services is the most powerful factor influencing its success or failure. Remember that culture is a pattern of shared basic assumptions learned by a group to address and solve problems. Let's look at some aspects of culture within recreation parks and leisure services. So, parts of culture can be how organizations transmit meaning through different things, such as the observed behavioral regularities when people interact, things we do on a regular basis with other folks, the norms that involve and evolve in working groups. So, how do different people and groups work together in and out of different spaces, organizational values and philosophy, rules, procedures, and methods of which conduct business or operations, and then feeling conveyed from this physical environment, and finally, the way individuals interact with participants and each other. Let's look at mechanistic and organic organizations. Mechanistic organizations are very consistent. They prepare standard responses to a large variety of issues or problems. The work is fixed, routine, and systematic. They produce goods or services for individuals' similar interests and needs, and they operate successfully in a stable environment. Let's compare that with our organic structures. So organic structures, they usually produce a variety of goods and services for a large cross-section of individuals. There may or may not be fixed roles, and it's very fluid. They're very flexible to adapt to the environment. So when there's rapid and unpredictable environment in the business or organization, they can adapt to that. And usually the hierarchical forms, the chain of command, is a little bit more decentralized and not as rigid. So in general, organizations are on a continuum of this, and this is included in parks, recreation, and leisure, and all that. So on one end, we've got the mechanistic, rigidly structured organizations. On the other end, we've got the organic structures and organizations that are quite flexible. One popular aspect that you need to understand is the Weber's bureaucratic model of organization management principles. The division of labor allows for organizational hierarchy. So there's things like unity of command, where one person is the command or the supervisor. They have a certain span of control over individuals and processes. They have authority and responsibility to make sure everything goes smoothly. And there's scalar and functional processes by which they must ensure happen in good order to provide good services or products. There are a variety of different types of business ownership in the United States, and the terminology and the very specifics of business ownership will change from state to state. Sole proprietorship is when management and ownership of an organization are the same. This is typically one person that owns a business. For example, a lawn mowing business. The person that owns the business and manages the business and carries out the task of the business is all the same individual. A partnership exists when two or more people decide to join together to form a business. So if me and a friend decide to own and operate a lawn mowing business, we could both be in on the management and task and ownership of the business, or we could split up duties. Then there's corporations. They're defined as a legal entity existing only on paper in the eyes of law, and usually they have the same rights and privileges as an individual. They're an artificial being. It's important to remember that the type of ownership determines the structure of the bureaucracy. So the structure of the organization is determined by how we look at it from an owner perspective. Work activities of private recreation parks and leisure organizations are usually governed by a board of directors. In the for-profit oriented organization, sometimes the organization or the business grows to the point that the board has to employ a manager or a supervisor, sometimes known as a director or CEO, to supervise the functions normally handled by the board. The day-to-day operations, supervision of employees, and stuff like that. The board no longer is involved in organization and implementation of services, serves more of a guiding hand or a guiding factor. The responsibilities are delegated to this manager or supervisor, and the bureaucratic structure, because of the insertion of the manager or supervisor, the bureaucratic structure grows vertically. As a for-profit business grows, a couple things usually change. Structures are subdivided along functional lines or geographically distributed, depending on the organization. There is a horizontal and vertical growth of the organization, meaning things get a little bit more delineated, and we add staff. Tasks may be subdivided. So a person that did 5 tasks may only do 2 or 3, and they hire another person to do the other ones. Staff functions and personnel and research all become a little bit more important. So we're going to hire more staff. We're going to have defined and different functions. We're looking at different personnel, and we're going to research a lot more on what we're doing and how we can innovate and be better. Here we're going to look at 3 types of boards or commissions. The first one is going to be separate and independent boards. These are autonomous units that help and have authority to develop and enforce policy. They operate independently of other governmental bodies, so this is called a separate or independent board. Then we have semi-independent boards. They do not have full powers that separate and independent boards have. They're established and implemented so that they can form policy, but they do not have full power of authority. That's a semi-independent board. And then we move to advisory boards. They serve as means for individuals to participate in the bureaucratic structure. They make recommendations but have no formal authority. Again, that's an advisory board. Let's look at a systems approach to managing a parks and recreation operation. In these services, a systems analysis approach allows managers to look at interrelationships that exist, and they view that on a micro and macro scale. This graphic shows a macro view of the systems approach. So the manager positions the organization's resources to adapt to constraints, and they view the organization as part of a larger environment. So in turn, we have things that are affected and affect that aspect. We can look at manager can make more productive decisions based on their philosophies, and our philosophies allow the manager to make a more productive decision. The manager acknowledges relationships that exist in various systems. So acknowledging that relationship can help with the philosophy, and that philosophy can help understand and deal with those relationships. And then we can look at the microenvironment operating within the larger system. So in this microenvironment, we have activities of an organization that are composed of subsets. So they're broken down into smaller pieces. The subsystems produce a set of expectations that result in behavioral outcomes. So each subsystem has their own expectations as far as behaviors and stuff like that regarding the organization's outcomes. It's important to know that critical theory, so that you can recognize subsystems can be deliberately constructed to produce specific outcomes. So if we understand theories, we can deliberately construct certain areas so that we have and can expect and get certain outcomes. When we think about modular organizations, we're going to talk about 5 different aspects. First one is individual project organization. This is where project managers complete assignments on their own. Then we can look at staff project organization. The manager is involved in leading the project and their support and backup to complete the tasks by other individuals. Next, we'll look at intermix. This is when the manager has joint responsibility of overseeing a project. So there's somebody else also involved in the oversight of the project. The aggregate project organization is when the project manager is responsible for all functions of an organization from top to bottom. Then we look at matrix organization. It occurs when the project organization exists side by side. So individuals operating have dual responsibilities. They may be doing two different things within different projects or within the organization. It's important to realize and remember that recreation parks, tourism, and other services are dynamic and ever-changing to respond to the needs and wants of our constituents. Next, we'll talk about decentralization, and this occurs when authority is dispersed or given out to a variety of individuals. Methods to decentralize may be organized to respond to the needs of people in different geographical areas or different cultural groups. Let's look at and compare centralized and decentralized organizations. First, let's look at geographic arrangement. Centralized means everything and everybody is all in one location. Decentralized means we have organizations throughout the areas of wherever we're looking at. So if you look at a city, centralized means we have one office in one building by which we operate. Decentralized means we may have different offices and facilities throughout the community to respond to community needs or best operate. Functional units. So with centralized, functions fall under administratively with one location. Decentralized, the authority for handling different functions falls under the program area or department. So instead of having one director that oversees everything, we may have managers of certain areas that have authority and supervisory privileges. Delegation of authority. So in a centralized organization, it's often difficult to delegate. In decentralized, individuals have the authority to make decisions, and this can range in how that happens from the ground up, meaning from the frontline staff making decisions all the way up to the supervisor or director making decisions. And a lot of this depends on the organizational structure and the type of program or facility being discussed. Next, let's talk about the federation model of an organization. There are three key features. The specialized groups work cooperatively toward a set of common goals. Specialized groups are autonomous, independent, and self-sufficient. And there's voluntary nature of involvement, meaning the authority structure of the federation lacks the coercion found in the mechanistic method of organizations. So just a quick review. The key features of the federation model of organization include specialized groups working toward common goals. The groups are autonomous, independent, and they have self-fulfillment. And there's voluntary nature involvement. So let's look at the role of a manager within this federation model. The manager is more of a facilitator and a catalyst and enabler of the group. There's no authority to direct any group to do a specific task, and a manager acts more in a coordinated capacity. They're in a position to help formulate general policy of a federation, but in general, they're looking at facilitating, being a catalyst, and enabling the group, so in a support capacity. Next, let's talk about horizontal organizations. They're focused on promoting greater cooperation and interaction between individuals within an organization. So often, horizontal organizations are process-oriented. They're comprised of teams of individuals, and participant satisfaction becomes a driver of work within this type of organization. The 5 primary principles of a horizontal organization are teams as the cornerstone of organizational design and performance, a decrease in hierarchy, so it gives teams authority to make decisions on their process areas, emphasize multiple competencies, train individuals to work in cross-functional areas and across tasks, measure for end-of-process performance objectives. This is true at the customer, employee, and financial area. Build Build corporate culture of openness, cooperation, and collaboration. This is the focus on continuous improvement. Next, let's talk about the network organization. This evolved directly from the beliefs of the knowledge era, and the focus is on creating teams of frontline professionals with entrepreneurial and leadership abilities. If you think about the network organization design in the parks, recreation, tourism, and leisure services fields, we need to realize that this is a response to the need for flexibility into the future, to reshape or promote a quality and cost effectiveness of our programs and services. This also increases our flexibility through outsourcing some of these responsibilities. There are 4 key components to successfully operating a network organization. First one is leadership is at the center. So leadership is where the action is. Organizations operate from the participant backwards. So we look at the needs and wants of participant and how to fulfill those and then work backwards. There's the flattening out or the elimination of bureaucracy. So we overcome some of that bureaucracy by eliminating some of it or making things easier for access. Then we ensure personal accountability. Individuals become entrepreneurs with ideas to improve participant satisfaction and program development. An important one to consider is the virtual organization. Management strategies include partnering with different organizations and people, outsourcing certain tasks, strategic management of alliances, so working with and aligning with certain things, people, organizations, and then organization will create a temporary network of resources as needed. I also wanted to talk about learning organizations. This is where there's a shared vision, transformational leadership. You encourage partnership among employees, and you view customers as partners in the process or idea generation. And then finally, you encourage a lot of collaboration within and external to the organization. It's important to understand the importance of developing long-term strategies in learning organizations. It's also important to enhance reflective powers to improve decision-making. You want to build on past knowledge and experiences. You're looking to forge new strategies to cope with changes into the future, so adapting to the needs of the future. And your employees are engaged in ongoing, continuous activities to look at new strategies and new developments. When we think about a learning organization and we consider our profession, think about it. Recreation parks, leisure, and tourism services, they need to be highly flexible, innovative, agile, and dynamic, and they need to respond to changes as we go. Even if we consider the current climate, whether it be politics, natural resources, the environment, or whatever it may be, think about how responsive to change parks and recreation must be. To summarize, the manager of recreation, parks, tourism, leisure, sport services must recognize that there are certain goals and objectives. They need to look at the structure of basic work activities and then consider all environmental factors. We can look at organizational structure on a continuum from mechanistic to organic structures. The managers must evaluate their environment to understand where they fit on this continuum and realize that mechanistic structures are better in stable environments and organic structures are better in changing environments or that are highly adaptable and dynamic. This concludes our presentation on organizing and structuring recreation parks and leisure services.